Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes on this one. Dropping a like helps ensure more people see the content, but it also just lets me know I'm doing a good job. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. And Halloween is coming up, so there should be some especially good horror stories coming up. Also really quick, just wanted to say thank you all so much for 125,000 subscribers. That was my 2025 goal, and I'm really excited to see that we hit it. We gained like 5,000 subs in the past couple months, and I just wanted to say thank you. So, again, thank you all so much. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the horror stories right after the ad break after this intro. There will not be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. When I was a kid, my mom kept a heavy leather photo album on the coffee table. Thick black pages, plastic sleeves, Polaroids tucked between brittle corners. I used to flip through it when she was cooking or when I was supposed to be doing homework. Back then, I thought of it as proof that our family was normal. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, summer trips to the lake, mundane and ordinary, but comforting. I didn't notice him at first. Why would I? When you're 7 years old, you don't scan every photo like a detective. You look for your face, your siblings, the dog. But years later, when I was visiting home after college, I picked the book up again. Nostalgia, I guess. That's when I saw him. He's in every photo, not in a way that jumps out immediately. Sometimes he's in the background, leaning against a tree. Other times he's at the edge of the frame, blurred by motion. Once, he's sitting 2 rows back at my 5th birthday party, in the McDonald's Play Place seating area, staring directly into the camera. The strange thing is, I didn't know him. My parents didn't know him. Nobody in the family knew him. I asked my mom, laughing at first, flipping the album around to show her. "Who's this guy? He's everywhere. Look, he's behind Aunt Claire in the Christmas photo, then again at the lake, and here at the carnival." She took the book from me. Her fingers froze on the page. "That's just some stranger," she said finally, snapping the cover shut. "You know how people wander into pictures. He's probably just a coincidence." But her tone wasn't casual. She put the album back on the shelf and didn't let me look at it again that night. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconstruct the photos in my head. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. He didn't even seem to age. His hair was always the same length, the same style. His clothes never really changed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized he wasn't just in the background. He was looking, always at the camera, always at us. And now I can't shake the thought. If he's in every picture, then he was there, at every moment, every holiday, every trip, every birthday, standing close enough to be caught on film. Which means he was always near us, watching. The next morning I brought it up again. Over coffee I said, "Mom, seriously, who was that guy in the photos? You knew everyone else at those parties, the neighbors, family friends. Why didn't anyone ever mention him?" She didn't look at me. She stirred her cup with this slow, deliberate rhythm, like she was buying herself time. Finally she said, "You're overthinking it. It's just someone passing through. People photobomb all the time." But her voice cracked when she said photobomb. I knew better than to push. My mom has that way of shutting a conversation down, pressing her lips together so tight, you can hear the finality in it. Still, when she left for work, I went back to the bookshelf and pulled out the album. I sat cross-legged on the floor, turning pages carefully, like the paper might disintegrate in my hands. There he was, always there. Christmas '94. behind the tree, only half his face visible in the branches. Family reunion 97, across the picnic field, sitting alone on a bench. My high school graduation, dead center in the bleachers, eyes locked on the camera. It wasn't just that he was in the photos, it was that he didn't change. The same dark jacket, the same haircut, the same posture, straight-backed, hands clasped loosely in front. My uncle had gone from full head of hair to bald. My cousins had grown taller, acne giving way to clearer skin. Even the dog had aged, but not him. I tried to be logical. Maybe it was some old family friend, someone I just didn't remember. Maybe Mom was embarrassed, or there had been a falling out. That would explain the secrecy, the tone in her voice. But it didn't explain the lack of aging. I decided to test it. I pulled out one of the Polaroids from its sleeve. My 7th birthday. I took a magnifying glass from the drawer and studied the man in the background. The resolution was grainy, colors faded, but his expression was clear. Neutral. Almost pleasant. His eyes, though? His eyes seemed too sharp for the cheap film. I compared it to the photo from my high school graduation. Same eyes, same expression. The only thing that changed was how much closer he was. At that birthday, he was near the back wall of the play place. At graduation, he was right there in the middle of the crowd. Closer. That word stuck in my head all night. When I called my dad about it, hoping he'd laugh and give me some old forgotten story, he got quiet instead. Then he asked me to stop asking questions. His exact words were, "Don't dig into it. Let it go. For your own good." That's when I knew it wasn't a coincidence. And that's when I decided I had to know. So I scanned the photos, every single one that had him in it. Then I uploaded them to a facial recognition site, one of those free trial tools. I sat there chewing my nails, watching the little spinning wheel as the site combed through public databases. When the results came back, it wasn't a name. It wasn't anything at all. Just an error message. Face not recognized. No matches found. I tried again with another site, same result, and another, same thing. It was like he didn't exist. But he does. Because when I closed my laptop, my reflection in the dark screen wasn't alone. For half a second, just over my shoulder, I swear I saw him standing there. After that incident, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every shadow stretched too long. I ended up grabbing the photo album upstairs to my old bedroom, setting it on the desk like it was some kind of evidence file. I told myself I was going to prove he wasn't what I thought, that there had to be some explanation. But the photos didn't stay the same. The first time I noticed, it was subtle. A snapshot from our trip to Niagara Falls. My dad holding me on his shoulders, water spraying in the background. I remember that photo clearly because Dad had a goofy plastic poncho on. But now, the man was standing behind us. He wasn't in the original. I know he wasn't. He was closer than he'd ever been before, his face angled just enough that both of his eyes were visible. And this time, he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, more like someone holding back a secret. I flipped to another photo, my 8th grade science fair. The man had been in the back row before, blurry between parents. Now his head tilted just slightly toward me, his mouth open like he'd just spoken. I felt sick. My palms started sweating, pages sticking as I turned faster and faster. Every picture had shifted, not in obvious ways, nothing dramatic, nothing that would scream altered, just little things. A glance, a lean. The man's body turned ever so slightly toward me, like he was aware I was looking at him. I shut the book and shoved it under my bed, but that didn't help because the images were burned into my brain. I kept thinking about his eyes, sharp, too sharp, the way they seemed to cut through the blur of cheap cameras. That night I dreamed I was flipping through the album again, but instead of birthdays or vacations, every page was a photo of me, right there in my room, taken from just outside the window. In every one, the man was closer, 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 until the last photo was nothing but his face. I woke up gasping, heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. The album was back on my desk. I know I shoved it under the bed. I remember the scrape of cardboard against carpet, but there it was sitting upright, open to the graduation photo. And this time, the man wasn't in the crowd. He was standing on stage, next to me. After that, I stopped pretending this was nostalgia. Something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell anyone. What could I even say? Hey, remember that stranger in every childhood memory we have? Well, he's moving closer now. Yeah, that'd go over well. Instead, I tried to ignore it. I shoved the album into the closet and stacked board games on top of it. Out of sight, out of mind. Except it wasn't. The man started showing up outside the photos. It began with the bathroom mirror. I just finished brushing my teeth when I saw him standing at the very edge of the reflection, where the doorway met the hall. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the toothbrush. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. When I looked back, so was the mirror. The next time, it was worse. I was in the kitchen, late at night, drinking water. The window above the sink looked out into the backyard. Dark, empty, nothing but trees. Except not empty. A figure was standing at the tree line, perfectly still. I didn't need the details to know it was him. The posture was the same, straight-backed, hands folded, waiting. I backed away, heart hammering, telling myself it was just a trick of the dark, some shadow. But when I blinked, his head tilted, slow, deliberate, like he knew I was watching. I yanked the curtains shut and didn't open them again. From then on, reflections betrayed me. Every dark screen, every pane of glass. I'd see him behind me, just far enough that I couldn't make out all the details. But I felt him, the weight of his gaze pressed down like a hand on my shoulder. I started covering mirrors. I unplugged the TV. I left the laptop lid closed. Still, I couldn't escape him, because he wasn't just showing up in the house anymore. He was interacting with the album. One night I heard rustling from the closet, soft like pages turning. I froze in bed, every muscle locking. The sound went on for a minute, then stopped. When I finally forced myself to look, the closet door was cracked open. The board games I'd stacked on top of the album were scattered across the floor, and the album itself was lying open, pages fluttering as if from a breeze. I crept closer, every instinct screaming to stop, and I saw what page it had landed on. Not a childhood memory, not a holiday. It was a photo I'd never seen before. Me, sitting in my bed. Now. And in the bottom corner of the frame, half in shadow, the man was standing inside my room. I couldn't take it anymore. The album, the photos changing, the man pressing into my house. None of it made sense. There had to be an explanation. Some missing piece. So I confronted my mom. She was in the living room folding laundry when I dropped the album on the coffee table. The thud made her flinch. She looked at it like I'd just set down a dead animal. "Tell me who he is," I demanded. My voice shook, but I didn't care. "The man. He's in every picture. And don't tell me it's coincidence, because he's in ones that didn't even exist before." Her hands tightened on a towel until her knuckles went white. She didn't answer. "Mom?" I pressed. "Please, just tell me the truth." Finally, she set the towel down and sank onto the couch. For the first time in my life, she looked old, tired, like she'd been holding something in for decades and it had finally rotted her from the inside. "I hoped you wouldn't notice," she whispered. We all hoped. My skin went cold. We? She nodded slowly. Your grandmother, your uncle, your father, and me. We never talk about him. That's the rule. You don't say his name. You don't point him out. You don't acknowledge him because if you do, he notices you back. Her eyes glistened. She looked at me the way someone looks at a terminal patient. Grief already there. Why is he in our pictures? I asked. Mom shook her head. He's always been in our family. Always. As far back as the albums go. Every generation, he's there. Weddings, funerals, baptisms. Sometimes he's just a blur. Sometimes he's closer. She covered her mouth like she regretted saying that much. I leaned forward. What does he want? Her hand dropped into her lap. She didn't answer. Mom? My voice cracked. What does he want? She whispered it so faintly I almost didn't hear. He chooses. I felt sick. Chooses what? Her eyes darted to the album. Who stays? Who doesn't? My stomach turned. Suddenly, pieces clicked together that I'd never questioned before. My cousin Danny, who disappeared when I was 10. The way relatives never talk about him. The empty chair at holidays nobody mentioned. I remembered once, when I was little, asking about him. My grandma had snapped. We don't talk about Danny. I thought it was grief, but now I wondered if it was fear. Because when I flipped to the family reunion photo, the one where we'd all gathered at the park, I noticed something I hadn't before. Danny was in that photo, smiling, holding a frisbee, but in the copy I held now, he wasn't. The man was standing in his place. I couldn't breathe. Danny wasn't in the photo anymore, just gone, erased like he'd never existed, and the man, standing where he'd been, looked sharper than ever, clearer than anyone else in the picture. I slammed the album shut and backed away. Mom, we can't just ignore this. He's here. He's here. She wouldn't look at me. The more you fight, the faster it happens. You've already seen too much. What happens? Her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That's when I heard it. A click. The unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. Faint, coming from somewhere inside the house. I froze. Did you hear that? Mom's face crumpled. He's already chosen. I spun toward the sound. The hallway was empty, shadows stretching long. My pulse roared in my ears as I crept toward the bedroom. The album was waiting for me on the desk. Open, pages fluttering though there was no breeze. Another click. I looked down. There on the fresh page was a new Polaroid. Still developing, the chemical haze fading into an image. Me, standing in the hallway, right now. Behind me in the photo, the man was closer than ever. Not blurred, not distant. His hand was outstretched, almost touching my shoulder. Click. Another Polaroid slid onto the page by itself. This one showed me staring at the photo I was holding, my own face pale, horrified, and behind me, no longer reaching, he was gripping my shoulder. I dropped the book and stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The lights flickered, and then the mirror across the room began to ripple, not like glass breaking, like water, like something was pressing through. A hand emerged first, pale, thin, fingers too long. They pressed against the glass, then curled around the frame. I couldn't move. My legs locked as his face pushed forward, stretching the surface until it tore open with a sound like wet fabric ripping. He stepped through. He was exactly as he appeared in every photo. Dark jacket, neat hair, expression calm. Only now he was inches away. Why? I choked out. My voice sounded tiny, useless. He tilted his head, studying me with those sharp, unblinking eyes, and then slowly, deliberately, he raised the old camera hanging from his neck. Click. The flash blinded me. For a second I saw nothing, just white. When my vision cleared, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was in the photo album. I could see my mom standing over the book, crying. I could see my own face, frozen mid-scream, trapped behind the glossy surface. And behind me, already stepping into the frame, was the man. Closer. Always getting closer. I never really believed in spirits or ghosts. Dumb cowards is the nickname I gave to horror-obsessed people, and as the world does with dumb people, I exploited them. It was a simple plan, really. Just a camera, a cursed-looking doll, and a few strings to fake a paranormal video. My product was an instant hit. People bought my haunted dolls for thousands of dollars. I even had a YouTuber make a video with it. They went viral in horror communities, and the demand was always more than I could fulfill. Business was good. Until tonight, of course. I was reading my business book on the bed under the warm light of my bedside lamp. It was like every other night. After I finished my chapter, I closed the book and took a moment to celebrate the small achievement. That's when I noticed something moving near the door. I focused my eyes to see if it was a bug that would trouble me all night. It was not a bug. What I saw made my eyes go wide as I froze in disbelief. There it was, sitting in front of the door. A doll. My doll. Smiling at me. None of the dolls I made ever had a smile on them. Customers liked the ones with frowns, so I made them all with frowns. How the hell did this doll get here? And why did it have a smile? In denial, I tried to shrug it off. I have been working a lot. Maybe it was an older piece when I used to do smiles. I got up to put it back on my shelf, but stopped in my tracks. My eyes were fixed on the doll. The frizzy hair and all the disturbing decorations I added to it suddenly seemed to overwhelm me with a feeling of dread. Something was wrong, and I could feel it. I wore my slippers and then jumped as a big thud came behind me. I jumped forward and turned around, letting out a whimpering scream. There it was. Another doll, with its bloodshot eyes and a crooked smile, sitting on my bedside table. I'm out. I rushed to the door, kicked the doll away, and opened the door. What I saw made me burst into tears. All my dolls, every single one of them. They all sat on the far end of the hallway, in dim moonlight bleeding from the window. They all had the exact same smile. And then they started laughing. The door behind me shut with a thud, pushing me and making me fall to the ground. I looked up as I got on my knees, the dolls staring into my eyes. "What do you want?" I cried. I did not want to admit, but I figured my small business was a little more serious than I anticipated. All those curses I recited, all the chants I did, I made way for something evil. And I know it's evil because just looking at those dolls laughing felt like a heavy weight on my back. "What do you want? Leave me alone," I cried. They all went silent, and as thunder boomed outside and a flash of lightning filled the hallway with a beam of light, I saw the words in blood written on the floor ahead of me. "Thank you." The door behind me opened slowly with a creak. Not knowing what to do, I just crawled back inside my room and shut the door close. The dolls in my room were gone. I waited all night in my room. My tears ran out. When the clock hit 6 a.m., I opened the door slightly, half expecting the dolls to jump and attack me. But all I saw was an empty hallway. Slower than a snail, I crawled inch by inch on all fours to my doll shelf. It was empty. They were all gone. They thanked me, and they left. I'm not sure what to make of this. I'm not sure what I have done. I am closing my business, but I have no idea what to do to make things right. I'm not sure if I even can. My grandfather froze to death on the kitchen floor in the middle of summer, and I'm the only person who knows what happened. My mom found him early on the morning of July 15th, stretched out between the refrigerator and the breakfast table like he'd been reaching for something. His skin was blue-white, ice crystals still clinging to his eyelashes when Mom screamed from the doorway. The thermometer on the kitchen wall read 82 degrees. I'm Theo, 17, part-time sandwich artist at Subway, full-time disappointment to my parents, college fund expectations. Normal kid from normal Midwestern stock, the kind who knows the difference between a blizzard watch and a blizzard warning, who can drive in snow before I can parallel park. I play JV basketball badly and work the closing shift 3 nights a week, biking home past empty storefronts and gas stations that close at 10. Nothing about my life prepared me for finding my grandfather's body that morning, or for understanding what had happened. My grandpa, Isaac, had lived with us for 4 years. Ever since Grandma died and Dad decided the old man shouldn't be rattling around the farmhouse anymore. Grandpa was 74, with arthritis in his hands and a habit of falling asleep in his recliner with the TV remote balanced on his chest. He'd worked 20 years managing the local IGA before retiring, knew everyone in town, remembered their kids' names, and which checkout girls have the best customer service. He was practical, steady, unremarkable in every way that mattered. He was also dead in our kitchen, ice cold in 80-degree weather. The coroner, Dr. Willits, spent 45 minutes examining the body. He took photographs, checked the thermostat, questioned Mom and Dad about Grandpa's health, his medications, whether he'd seemed confused or disoriented lately. He measured the room temperature 3 times with different thermometers, frowning at readings that made no sense. Hypothermia, he announced finally, signing papers with the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of determining cause of death. Severe hypothermia due to unknown environmental factors, possibly a neurological episode affecting temperature regulation. Dad asked the obvious question. How does someone freeze to death when it's 80 degrees outside? Dr. Willits adjusted his glasses and delivered the answer that would satisfy the insurance company, the death certificate, and everyone except me. Sometimes the body's regulatory system fails catastrophically. Medication interactions, undiagnosed conditions, stroke affecting the hypothalamus. The body can literally lose the ability to maintain core temperature. Mom mentioned the frost she'd seen around the body, but Dr. Willits dismissed it as condensation from the air conditioning. I didn't correct him, even though our AC had been off for 3 days. The funeral was on Thursday. Half the town showed up, filling past the casket to pay respects to a man who'd bagged their groceries and remembered their faces for 2 decades. They spoke about his kindness, his reliability, how he'd given their teenagers first jobs and second chances. None of them knew about the temperature of his skin when they found him, or the thin layer of frost that had formed around his body, like he'd been lying there in January instead of July. None of them had seen what I saw when I came downstairs that morning, when Mom's screaming brought me and Dad running. I saw my grandfather's final expression, frozen on his face in the moment death took him. He wore no peaceful look like most people would imagine. His eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling, and his mouth was open like he'd been trying to say something important. He looked terrified. Strange things started happening 2 months ago. May 28th in Minnesota means tornado watches and sudden thunderstorms, the kind of weather that keeps you checking the sky every few minutes. It doesn't mean finding patches of kitchen floor so cold they make your feet ache through wool socks. But that's exactly what I found that Tuesday morning after Memorial Day. A circle of tile near the sink that felt like stepping on January pavement. Mom blamed the air conditioning, even though we hadn't turned it on yet. Dad checked the basement for broken pipes, crawling around with a flashlight and muttering about foundation settling. The cold spot vanished by Thursday, but another one appeared in the hallway upstairs, then another in the living room by the weekend. "Old house to settle," Dad said when I mentioned it. "Foundation shifts, creates drafts you wouldn't expect." Our house was built in 1987. It wasn't exactly old by anyone's standard. Dad liked cheap explanations that didn't require calling repair services. I pressed my palm against the frigid patch of living room carpet, watching my breath form small clouds in the 70-degree air. When I called Mom over to feel it, her hand passed through the cold like it wasn't there. "Feels normal to me, honey," she said, giving me that concerned look parents get when they think you're coming down with something. But I could see the frost forming on the carpet fibers where my breath hit them. The winter winds started a week later. I'd be watching TV or doing homework, and suddenly smell snow in the air. That sharp, clean scent that comes from a blizzard. The smell would drift through rooms like invisible smoke, carrying whispers I could almost understand. Once I followed the scent upstairs to Grandpa's room, where he was sitting on his bed looking at old photo albums, his face pale and distracted. "You smell that?" I asked him. He looked up from a picture of him and Grandma at some company picnic. His hands were shaking as he closed the album. "Smell what?" "Like snow. Like winter." "It's May, Theo," but his voice cracked when he said it, and I noticed he was wearing a sweater despite the warm afternoon. The whispers came with the wind that smelled like snow, voices so quiet I couldn't be sure I was actually hearing them. Sometimes they seemed to be calling a name, sometimes just murmuring like people having a conversation in another room. I'd turn my head to catch the words, but they'd fade into nothing, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined them entirely. But Grandpa heard them too. I'd find him sitting in his chair at midnight, eyes wide open, responding to things the rest of the family couldn't detect. "I'm sorry," he'd whisper to the empty room. "I know you're cold. I know." When I asked him who he was talking to, he'd look at me with the desperate expression of a drowning man. "You can hear them too, can't you, Theo?" His voice barely above a whisper. "The voices in the wind?" I nodded, and something between relief and terror crossed his face. "Then you know she's coming." The shivering started in June. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, teeth chattering, pulling my covers tight around me. The room would feel normal to everyone else, maybe even warm, but my body acted like I'd been sleeping outside. When I mentioned it to Mom, she immediately started checking for fever and asking about my appetite. "Growing boys need more calories," she said, adding extra bacon to my breakfast. "Your metabolism's probably just running high." She couldn't see the frost forming on my bedroom windows while the thermostat read 75 degrees. Grandpa started acting strange around the same time, but this was different from the whispers. This was paranoia. He began looking over his shoulder when we watched TV together, checking the locks on doors that nobody ever used. During dinner, he'd pause mid-sentence and listen to sounds the rest of us couldn't hear, his fork halfway to his mouth, eyes darting toward the kitchen doorway. "Nothing there," he'd mutter, when I followed his gaze. "Just tired." But tired people don't spend 20 minutes staring at the same photograph, and they don't whisper apologies to themselves while they think no one's listening. I started finding him with those photo albums more often, usually the ones from his working years at the IGA. He'd flip through pages slowly, his fingers tracing faces I didn't recognize, his lips moving in silent conversation. One afternoon in late June, I found him in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, still in his pajamas, staring at the spot where his body would be found 3 weeks later. The linoleum around his bare feet was covered in frost that sparkled under the overhead light. "Grandpa?" He turned toward me, but his eyes took a moment to focus, like he was seeing me from across a great distance. When he exhaled, his breath formed a small cloud between us. "She's coming," he said quietly. "She's been walking through the snow for 27 years, and now she's almost here." "Who's coming?" "I should have stopped. I should have helped her." His voice was barely audible. "But she was so cruel, Theo. So very, very cruel." I asked him what he meant, who he was talking about, but he just shook his head and shuffled back to his room, leaving wet footprints on the kitchen floor that steamed in the warm air. Everything came together the night I saw her. It was July 4th, just past midnight. Fireworks had been going off all evening, late celebrations from people who'd bought too many bottle rockets and didn't want to waste them. I was lying in bed, listening to the occasional pop and crackle from somewhere across town, when the temperature in my room dropped 20 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. I sat up, pulling my sheet around me, and saw her floating 3 feet above the hallway carpet. She was translucent, like looking through ice, but I could make out her basic shape, a woman in what might have been a winter coat, her hair hanging in frozen strands around her face. Snow clung to her shoulders and sleeves, never melting, never falling. She moved without talking, drifting down the hall towards Grandpa's room with the deliberate purpose of someone who knew exactly where she was going. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as she passed my doorway, leaving a trail of frost on the walls where she'd been. The air around her shimmered with cold, and I could hear the sound winter makes, that particular silence that comes with heavy snow, broken only by the soft whisper of ice crystals forming. She turned her head toward me as she passed, and for just a moment I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and empty and cold enough to freeze blood. Her mouth was open in an expression that might have been speaking, but no sound came out. Just that patient, terrible silence. When she reached Grandpa's door, she didn't open it. She simply passed through the wood like it was made of mist. I stayed in bed until morning, wrapped in every blanket I owned, listening to the one-sided conversation that drifted through the walls. Grandpa's voice apologizing over and over to someone who answered only with the sound of wind through bare trees. By the time the sun came up, the temperature had returned to normal, but I found a single perfect snowflake on my windowsill, refusing to melt despite the July heat. I knew then that my grandfather was going to die, and that I was the only one who could understand why. My grandfather told me the worst thing he'd ever done. It was July 13th, 2 days before we found him dead on the kitchen floor. He'd spent the morning pacing between his bedroom and the kitchen, muttering under his breath and checking door locks that were already secure. The house felt like a meat locker, despite the air conditioning being off, but only Grandpa and I seemed to notice. By afternoon, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "Theo," he said, finding me in the garage where I was fixing a flat tire on my bike. "I need to tell you something about Mary." I'd never heard him mention anyone named Mary before, but something in his voice made me set down my wrench and pay attention. He looked older than his 74 years. His shoulders bent forward like he was carrying something impossibly heavy. When he breathed, small puffs of vapor escaped his lips despite the stifling heat. "I worked at the IGA for 20 years, he began, settling onto Dad's workbench with careful movements. Made some good friends there. Jimmy in produce, Alice in customer service. Bill, who ran the meat counter. He paused, his hands working against each other in his lap. And then there was Mary. The temperature in the garage dropped 10 degrees when he said her name. She worked in the office, bookkeeping, scheduling, handling complaints. Been there longer than anyone, maybe 15 years when I started. Everyone called her Mean Mary behind her back, though never where she could hear it. His voice got quieter, more distant, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Mary had a talent for finding people's weaknesses and pressing on them until they broke. New employees, part-timers who couldn't afford to quit, anyone she thought was beneath her. But what she did to Tommy was the day I knew she was something beyond cruel. Beyond human, maybe. The Tuesday she destroyed Tommy was like watching a predator hunt. Tommy worked maintenance, had some kind of mental problem that made him talk slowly and repeat himself sometimes. Sweet kid, maybe 25, lived with his mother and needed that job more than anything. A customer complained about water on the floor near produce. Standard stuff. Happens every day. Grandpa's breath came out in visible puffs now, and frost began forming on the workbench where his hands rested. Mary saw her chance. She called Tommy over to the customer service counter where everyone could see. Employees, shoppers, kids waiting with their mothers, started interrogating him about his careless mopping, making her voice loud enough for the whole front end to hear. I could see the scene playing out in his eyes, 27 years of guilt etched in the lines around them. Then she started imitating his speech. Made her voice slow and halting like his, stumbling over words the way he did when he got nervous. Tommy, sorry. Tommy, try harder. She kept getting louder, drawing more people over to watch this grown man being humiliated like a child. The frost was spreading now, crawling up the garage walls in delicate patterns that caught the afternoon light. Tommy just stood there holding his mop, tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand why everyone was laughing. Mary wasn't done. She told the customer, loud enough for everyone to hear, that Tommy was mentally deficient, and that the store kept him on out of charity. She said maybe they should find someone more capable to clean up after normal people. Grandpa's voice broke completely. The customer looked horrified, tried to say it wasn't that big a deal, just a wet floor, but Mary kept going, called Tommy a burden to decent society, and said his mother should be ashamed for inflicting him on normal people. Tommy collapsed right there, sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. He never came back. Found out later his mother had to take him to the emergency room that night because he wouldn't stop shaking. The doctor said it was a panic attack. But I knew better. Mary had broken something inside him that never got fixed. That was the kind of person Mary was, Grandpa whispered. Someone who could destroy an innocent man for entertainment and sleep soundly that night. I asked him why he was telling me this. What Mary had to do with the cold spots and whispers that followed us throughout the house. His hand stopped moving. When he looked at me, his eyes were wet and desperate. Because I'm the reason she's dead. The story came out slowly, like he was pulling each word from somewhere deep and painful. February 14th, 1998, 7 years before I was born. A blizzard had moved in faster than predicted, dropping 19 inches of snow in 6 hours, and creating whiteout conditions across 3 counties. Store management made the call to close early, 2 in the afternoon instead of 9 at night. Everyone was anxious to get home before the roads became completely impassable. Mary had left first, as she always did. She lived alone in a rented house on the other side of town, and drove an old Buick that wasn't reliable in the best conditions, let alone in a blizzard. Grandpa stayed another hour, helping to secure the store and making sure all the coolers and freezers were properly sealed in case they lost power. By the time he left, the snow was falling so hard he could barely see his truck in the parking lot. I took County Road 47, he said. It was faster, and your grandmother was waiting with dinner. I'd driven that road 1,000 times. His voice got quieter, forcing me to lean closer to him. I saw her headlights first, flashing on and off, like someone signaling for help. The Buick was nose first in a snowbank, maybe 15 yards off the road. As he got closer, he could see Mary standing beside her car, waving her arms frantically. Even through the snow and wind, he could tell she was in trouble. I pulled over, he said, sat there with my engine running, looking at her through my windshield. She was walking toward me, stumbling through knee-deep snow. The garage was freezing now, cold enough that I could see my own breath mixing with his in the space between us. I thought about Tommy crying while everyone laughed, about the way she'd call him deficient, a burden. I thought about the kind of person who could destroy someone like Tommy and sleep soundly that night. His hands were shaking now, from the cold or emotions I couldn't tell. She reached my truck, started pounding on the passenger window with her fists, screaming something I couldn't hear over the wind. Her face was pressed against the glass, and I could see the terror in her eyes. She knew she was going to die out there if no one helped her. He paused, his breath coming in short, sharp puffs that crystallized in the air. I put the truck in drive and kept going. The words hung between us like icicles. She ran after me for maybe 20 yards, waving and screaming. I watched in my rearview mirror until the snow swallowed her up. Then I drove home and told your grandmother I'd taken the main route because it was safer. They didn't find Mary's body until March, when the snow finally melted enough for a farmer to spot something that didn't belong in his field. She'd made it almost a mile from her car before the cold took her, found frozen in a drainage ditch, with her arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the same winter coat I'd seen floating through our hallway. I killed her, Grandpa whispered, and I've been living with that for 27 years. The frost had covered every surface in the garage now, turning our breath into clouds, and making the metal tools ring like bells when the expanding ice shifted them. She's been walking through that blizzard ever since, he said, walking through the snow and the cold, getting closer every year. And now, she's found me. I asked him why he was telling me this now, after keeping it a secret for so long. He looked toward the house, where shadows were beginning to gather in the windows as evening approached. Because she's here, Theo. She's been in my room every night for a week, standing at the foot of my bed, dripping snow melt on the carpet. She doesn't say anything, just watches me with those frozen eyes. His voice dropped to almost nothing, and I think you're the only one who can see her too. The air conditioner stayed off for the last 2 days of my grandfather's life. After his confession in the garage, he became obsessed with heat. Every time someone turned on the AC to combat the mid-80s weather, he'd shut it off within minutes, his hands shaking as he adjusted the thermostat. Can't stand the cold air, he'd mutter, pulling on another sweater despite the sweltering house. When Dad complained about the temperature, Grandpa begged. Just keep it off, he pleaded. Please. The whispers were constant now. Where before I'd barely been able to make out voices on the wind, now I could hear words clearly. Left me. So cold. They drifted through the house like smoke, always in Mary's voice, though I'd never heard her speak when she was alive. Mom and Dad noticed Grandpa's behavior, but attributed it to grief or maybe early dementia. They scheduled a doctor's appointment for the following week and talked in hushed voices about assisted living facilities and medication adjustments. They couldn't see the frost forming on windows despite the 80-degree indoor temperature. They couldn't see the way their breath became visible whenever they stood too close to Grandpa's usual spots. When I pressed Mom's hand against a wall covered in ice, her fingers passed through it like it wasn't there. Don't you feel that? I asked desperately. Feel what, honey? She looked at me with growing concern. Are you feeling all right? But I could see the frost spreading under her touch, could feel the supernatural cold seeping through my clothes and into my bones. On July 14th, the day before he died, Grandpa stopped sleeping entirely. I found him in the living room at 2 in the morning, fully dressed, staring at the front door. The house was stifling without air conditioning, but his breath formed steady clouds when he spoke. She's getting closer, he said without looking at me. Where is she? Right there. He pointed toward the empty hallway. Can you see her? She's standing by the stairs, just watching. I looked where he was pointing and saw nothing but shadows, but the temperature in that spot had to be below freezing, because frost was forming on the wall in the shape of a woman. What is she doing? Nothing, just looking at me, but I can feel the cold coming off her, like standing next to an open freezer. And her eyes, he shuddered, her eyes are like looking into a January sky. We sat together until dawn. I held his frail, cold hand, listening to him whispering apologies to the empty air, while I watched frost patterns spread across surfaces that should have been warm. When the sun came up, he seemed to relax slightly, but I knew the relief was temporary. That evening, our house felt like an oven. The air conditioner sat silent while the July heat pushed the indoor temperature well into the 90s. Every fan in the house ran at full speed, but they couldn't compete with the supernatural winter that followed my grandfather from room to room. The whispers started earlier than usual, just after sunset. This time they weren't random phrases, but something more focused, more demanding. I couldn't make out all the words, but Grandpa could. He sat in his chair, no longer pretending he couldn't hear her. I know, he said to the empty room, his voice steady for the first time in days. I remember leaving you there. A pause, as if he were listening to something I couldn't quite catch. Yes, you called my name. You begged me to help. Another pause, longer this time. The frost was spreading faster now, covering the walls around his chair in intricate ice patterns. I'm sorry, his voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Mary, but you have to understand what you did to those people. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in thick clouds, and ice began forming on the inside of windows. No, Grandpa said, shaking his head. Sorry isn't enough. I know that now. The conversation continued for hours, Grandpa responding to accusations I could only partially hear, accepting blame for a decision that had haunted him for 27 years. Sometimes I caught fragments of her voice on the wind. Left me to die. So cold. Near midnight, his voice changed, became resigned. Yes, you were alone. You died alone because of me, and that was cruel. Maybe as cruel as anything you ever did. I deserve this, but please, leave my family alone. They don't know what I did, he said with a tired, dejected voice. By 1 in the morning, the house felt like a walk-in freezer. Ice covered every surface I could see, turning our home into a winter landscape. The whispers had stopped, replaced by something worse. The sound of someone breathing slowly in the darkness, each exhalation bringing more cold. Theo, he said with all the warmth and affection he could muster. Go to bed. You can't help me. I'm ready. I'm tired, and this is nothing you or anyone should ever have to see. I went to bed knowing I'd never see my grandfather alive again, but unable to do anything except watch it happen. Mary had finally gotten her revenge, and she'd made sure my grandfather experienced every moment of the cold that killed her. The only difference was that she'd died alone in a field, while he died surrounded by the warmth of a family who loved him. It wasn't mercy, it was just a different kind of cruelty. 3 weeks later, I sent my college applications exclusively to schools in Florida and Arizona. Some things are too cold to forget, and I never want to feel winter again. The frost disappeared from our house the day we buried Grandpa, but sometimes on the colder nights, I still hear whispers in the wind. They're fainter now, more distant, like someone calling from very far away. I think Mary is walking again, looking for the next person who left someone to die in the cold. Let me preface by saying I have always been very honest about what I was. I've never had any shame with what I am, with what my mother was, my grandmother, and a long line of women stretching back to the seeming beginning of time. I am a witch. I have always practiced. I have always had power, and not once have I ever harmed another living being. Not ever, despite what anyone might say. Several years ago, I saw a shirt a young lady was wearing on a rare trip to town. It said, "I am the descendant of the witches you forgot to burn." That shirt made me laugh. I ended up buying one off the internet at the public library. I don't have the internet at home, you see. I have been a self-imposed hermit for decades now. It's for the best. I made a choice and I have to stick with it. Back in the 70s, when I was still relatively young, something dark came to our town. Even I couldn't ascertain where it had come from. Not even my mother or my grandmother or any member of our small coven could understand its origin, regardless of where it had come from. It had come here. We first became aware of this dark thing when the first child went missing. The little boy turned up later, dead and drained and emaciated like a dried cicada husk. We were blamed first, because of course we were. If there was anything from rain to snow to someone with a bad case of acne, everyone in our town pointed a finger at us. Some did it in jest, some in habit, and some in outright and malicious hatred. Edith had been the first one to sense the thing. I still remember that evening. We had met for tea. No witchy business at all. It had been a delightful afternoon tea, when the poor lady had clutched her pearls and gasped like she'd seen a mouse. "Are you all right, Edith? Tea too hot?" my mother had asked softly, but I knew she suspected that was not the case, not with the way her eyes narrowed as she looked at the middle-aged woman. "No, dear heavens. Something has come to our town. I felt it pass through like a cold wind down my spine. Something wicked." Tears were in her eyes as she spoke. My mother nodded and poured out her tea, reading her tea leaves, while the rest of us looked on in anticipation. Her face was grim as she read what the bits of water-logged tea leaves had to say. "My dear ladies, we have work to do," my mother said, standing, wiping her hands on her apron as she stood. And we got to work, day and night, each of us using our particular talents to not only track the thing, but find a way to contain it. Constance read her ancient tomes and texts. Mary tracked the beast to its lair, using her divination skills. My mother and grandmother had their spells and potions, and I helped. My skills were in dreams and their interpretation. I spent many days fast asleep in medicine-induced stupor to glean what I could about this interloper. All I could learn was that it was ancient. Perhaps at one point it was worshipped. It had been summoned by those with less skill to do their bidding. Instead, it had killed its would-be jailers and fled into the world, finding victims and blood where it could. "Do you have a name, Gretchen? Without a name to bind it, our prison will not be as effective," my mother asked me, her voice filled with concern and anger, though thankfully that anger was not directed at me. "No, mother, no name. It has many names, and the dreams have not revealed its true name to me," I said softly. "No matter, the magic and bindings will hold, though we ourselves will be bound to it until our deaths," my grandmother explained. Her voice was old and strained after so many weeks of working magic. She seemed as frail as paper, and as thin. "And what about our deaths, Elizabeth? What then?" Mary asked, her voice sharp and worn thin of patience. "Then it shall be free, unless we can learn its true name and banish it from whence it came," my grandmother said with a tiny shrug. "A price we must pay to contain it. It's been killing children, and it will not stop until it has gone through every innocent life in this town," Edith said, teary-eyed. "We lay our trap. It was easy. I was the willing bait for the thing. I was the youngest, and mother and grandmother had filled me with potions and tinctures to make me more appetizing to the thing. We lured it to a small cave located on our property. We needed somewhere private where prying eyes would not see us, and more importantly, not disturb the thing once it was captured. It came quickly, on its shadowed feet. It took no effort to hide itself. It was darkness itself. No prey escaped it once it had its eyes set upon it. By this time, over a dozen children and young women had been killed. More blame was laid at our feet. We were being threatened to our faces. Dead animals were being thrown into our yards. Bricks with threats written on them were tossed through windows. When I left the thing's presence at my back, it took all the strength I had not to run. Our magic was strong, and unbeknownst to the thing, it was already trapped. I could feel the panic in it when it realized it could not leave the cave. Whispered threats were uttered as it reached for me and found it could not grasp me. It writhed, it screamed, and begged, and it promised all manner of worldly goods and powers if it would let us go. We ignored it. We all took turns sealing the small cave with bricks and mortar. No easy task to do in the forest on unsteady ground, but we managed. When the final brick was laid, our powers were tied to its containment, to its life, and hopefully eventually death. As long as one of us lived, it would be locked behind its prison of earth and brick. But then we started to die, one by one as old age claimed us. My grandmother first, followed by my mother. Constance drowned on a trip to Florida. Edith and Mary lived to be in their 90s. But the Grim Reaper comes for everyone in the end. I am the last. I'm in my 80s. I have never married or had children, though it was not for lack of trying. The rumors that it had been me and my coven who had killed those innocents all those years ago never went away. They only grew, and no man wanted me. I have been friendless now for many years. I have tried to find out the true name of the thing, but to no avail. I have looked in books. I have scoured the internet and found nothing. I have reached out to other supposed witches and been met with scammers and liars. I feel so alone. And now, I'm dying. The last few years, the harassment has gotten so much worse. I have not been able to safely leave my home, as when I do, I am followed and stalked. I've been threatened with death, and today it seems like they have made good on their threats. My home is on fire. The flames are creeping along my hallway, and I can see the light from the fire getting brighter. And there is smoke. So much smoke. Outside my window I hear them screaming the same thing people like them have screamed for centuries. Burn the witch. Burn the witch. I have fallen to the floor and I'm coughing, and I am afraid. Afraid for myself and the others. There are many innocent people that live in this town now. I can feel the thing stirring now. I can feel its anticipation. Once I die, it will be free, and the bricks have already begun to fall away. As the flames finally reach my door, I feel pity. I have no illusions about the pain and fear this creature will unleash on the people of this town, and they are about to learn a very important lesson, one that will be written in the blood of their children. There is a reason why you shouldn't burn witches. For the last couple years, I've been working at a cemetery out near the edge of town. It's decently large as I think we cater to the majority of the postal code. Now, it's not a job that I would have been eager to get, not because I am afraid or really think much of it. It's just the optics for other people. For me, I don't really see what we do being much different from what a long-term storage facility does. We too put boxes filled with inanimate objects into holes, then bury them forever. In fact, I'd argue that 4x8, full of Grand's lifelong accumulation of belongings, carries more of her soul than the nicest mahogany casket that we drop into the earth. But regardless, it did turn out to be a fine job. And honestly, it was quite boring until the day I met her. 2 months ago, we had just concluded a service for a young woman. It went fine as far as I can recall. I remember there was a small mention about how the girl's sister hadn't made it, and there was some sort of familial dispute over what they wanted to do with the body, I guess. Burial versus cremation. Both these things gave me something to ponder while I waited. I should clarify that my responsibilities were a bit of a catch-all. I would keep an eye on the cemetery. I hesitate to say guard. Really, I would just walk around and dissuade any precautious teens from trying to tag a headstone. The more exciting part was for burials. I would operate the excavator and dig the graves, and after the service, once the casket was lowered in, I'd fill them back up again. So during the service itself, I just listened to the families and friends give their last parting words, and then I'd wait until everyone left to go retrieve the excavator from the shed. After the last mourner had walked away dabbing their tears with a tissue, I went to the shed. Because we don't want to tear up the grass with the excavator's treads, I have to lay down a trail of plywood sheets leading from the dirt path over the grass to the open grave. It was when I had placed about half the sheets that I looked up and saw, next to the grave, a black umbrella facing me. Someone was holding it, but it was low to the ground. They must have been sitting, and it was positioned in a way that I couldn't even see an inch of them. I judged that someone from the service must have decided to return to say some last words before their dearly departed was lowered into the ground. I decided the most polite, if not fairly inconvenient thing for me to do was to wait and give them a little time. So I stood and hung my head in sort of a fa reverence. While my head was low and I was idly waiting there, I heard music. It was soft, but there was a definite melody in the air. There was a delicate singing with a drumming thump beneath it. It was beautiful and strange, and if you'll allow me, I would say haunting. But all the same, I have to admit, I didn't like it. I couldn't place it, but it felt discordant in a way that was unpleasant to me. It made my skin tingle, and it felt difficult to stand still. I decided to break my silence and clear my throat. The music stopped immediately, but the person didn't face me or even acknowledge me. It wasn't just that the song was unpleasant. I also needed to get this grave filled because it was a late service, and we were pushing into the evening. The sun was already casting a soft reddish haze over everything, and before long, would be tucking behind the horizon. It was preferable that I not have to operate the excavator in the dark, so I needed this person to finish up their goodbye. I gave them a moment longer to let them have the opportunity to begin the interaction on their own terms. But at that moment, then a few more, went by. I thought it would be up to me to initiate. I orbited around the umbrella, giving them a wide enough berth as to allow them some space as they were dealing with their emotions. I was picturing that they were probably frantically trying to wipe tears from their eyes, but as I came around, I was surprised to see they were smiling. She was smiling. Crouching there, swathed in the deep shadow of the umbrella, was a young woman. I'd bet she was somewhere in her 20s. But it was fairly hard to tell from the obscurity the shadow around her was contributing, and the heavy stylized makeup she was wearing. She had a coat of white face makeup, with black lipstick and black eyeliner, as is the fashion with many goth people, and I am confident in saying that's what she was. I will say here that I am not a stranger to goth and alternative cultures. As well, my job does tend to hinder me greatly in meeting and dating girls in the mainstream population. It has proved to be a bit of a boon with women in those communities. And besides, most of her makeup, her hair was also black, as was her... Actually, it would be easier to say. Nearly everything she had on her was black. She had a black band t-shirt, which had one of the few pops of color in the red font of the band's name. It was one of those metal or hardcore style fonts that are nearly impossible to read though. Beyond that, she was wearing an assortment of layers and accessories. Now, most interesting were her boots. They were in the style of popular goth boots. Specifically, I believe they were demonias, or at least something similar. But what was remarkable was that hers were pink, instead of black, and they were spotless, and thanks to their several inches of platform, even crouched, she was suspended above the ground. I will say I did not expect to see someone like her there, especially not smiling at me, and was suddenly at a loss for words. So she broke the silence and said, "Hi." I squeaked a weak "hi" back. Using that momentum, I pushed through to saying that I was coming with the excavator to fill the grave, and would unfortunately need her to leave so I could safely operate the machine. She maintained unblinking eye contact, and I sort of fell apart at the end and conceded that she could stay there until I finished laying the boards down, and it would take a few more minutes to go back to the shed and then return. Her smile fixed wider, and she thanked me. I nodded, having given up on trying to maintain any air of authority. I turned and left. After laying the last few pieces of plywood down, I turned and walked to the shed and looked back and saw her umbrellaed shape still there. Thinking to myself, I realized that she must of course be the sister that hadn't made it. I realized too, that would give me the perfect opening to try to talk to her again when I returned. Though it did feel maybe wrong to hope to socialize with her at her sister's grave, if that was in fact the case. In the end, I decided that it would be okay to ask if she was the sister, and just keep things neutral, and maybe she would appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It didn't actually matter what I thought because by the time I had pulled the excavator out of the shed, only a minute or two later since I'd seen her, she was gone. A quick scan across the whole graveyard, and I didn't see her anywhere. Honestly, I was just impressed she could make that distance in those shoes. But then again, I've met some girls who dressed like her, who could probably run an obstacle course halfway to blackout drunk in boots like hers. All the same, it was good because the sun was setting quickly. I got the grave buried and boards put away before late, and as I was locking up I sighed to myself that I would never really know why she was there. I was wrong. In fact, it was the very next day that I saw her next. Close to the same time, but it was still about an hour until I would be closing up. Weirdly, I only noticed her when she had already made it to the grave. This time it was filled with packed dirt and a couple rolls of fresh sod. I was making my rounds when I saw her on the way back. My rounds is really just a glorified way of saying I was taking a walk. When I recognized that it must be her again, I decided that last night's strategy for talking to her was still sound. So I finished my rounds and walked back up the dirt path I cut into the interior toward her. Immediately I stopped in my tracks. I could hear that singing again, and I think it was this moment I realized she was the one singing, and that it wasn't coming from a speaker, though it just had this melodic fullness to it that felt like it was an edited and arranged piece of music. But I know that a cappella artists and powerful singers can do incredible things, and she may very well be in either of those groups. Again, though, it shot a tingling feeling through my skin, and as I decided to begin walking toward her again, I realized I was having a bit of trouble balancing. Not unlike if you've ever stood up too quickly and you feel dizzy, and, like for a moment, you don't really know intrinsically which direction is up. My vision and other senses worked basically fine, so I was able to take a couple steps forward without tripping on myself. But in the moment I had a funny thought. It made me think of how in movies with astronauts, when they're trying to dock the ships or maneuver a robotic arm To grab something, they have to use impersonal controls. And the limited vision of their little computer screens to guide themselves. It felt a lot like that. Then suddenly my sense of balance returned. I lifted my eyes back up from the ground, and I saw with a start that I was standing only a few feet away from her. Somehow I had crossed a much further distance in that daze than I'd realized. She was looking back at me, not smiling this time, but with a more neutral expression. This was not how I anticipated this going, and I feared how awkwardly I may have lumbered my way up here. Quickly I tried to move on from that by mentioning how she was here again, and then asking if she was perhaps the deceased's sister. After a quiet moment she said yes. Then she said her name was Belle. I said, like the Beauty and the Beast? She laughed, then said, almost, but it's spelled B-E-L. I nodded, then trying to judge whether it was time for my exit or not, I decided to ask her about what she was singing, specifically if it was like a modern song or like a hymn or something. She said no, neither. It was a very old kind of song. It was a cemetery song. I debated whether that name was more of a description, and would just be stupid to ask what a cemetery song was. But it was how she said it that made it feel like there was more there. So I asked her what was a cemetery song, and prepared myself for condescending eyes and, "It's a song you sing in the cemetery." But instead she smiled, and said it was a specific type of song that you sing for the dead. I said, "Oh, like at a funeral." She laughed and then said very carefully, "No, no, no. They're not for the dead like that. They're for the dead. It's for them to hear." A shiver ran down my back. Now I've certainly heard some ideas and beliefs many times wilder than that, said by other goth and alternative people, but it was something about how calmly and matter-of-factly she said it that unsettled me. I didn't know what else to say, so the conversation stalled there, and I could tell she was getting ready to sing, and I didn't want to be caught in that again, so I started to move on. I made it decently far before she started singing again. It was such a strange song, and now as I try to think of what it sounded like, or what she sang, or anything specific, I'm floundering to think of anything. In the moment, I remember thinking how particular and strange it was. I could even recognize, maybe not English, but definite chunks of words of some languages. But now it feels like waking up from a dream where I suddenly can't remember a single specific thing about it. Speaking of a dream... It started the first night after the burial. I had a dream that I couldn't remember so well, only that I felt hot and like I was suffocating, and then I jumped up in my bed covered in sweat and gasping for air. The next night, it was much worse, and I remember it far more vividly. It was dark, but not like nighttime dark. It was an unfriendly, cruel, choking dark. I remember trying to reach out and find something in the blackness. I immediately did. In fact, I quickly realized there was a wall around me, well within reach. A new wave of terror came over me as my claustrophobia kicked in. Even as my heart was racing, and I was panicking so hard my dream was losing focus and falling into a bit of a distorted mess, as I believe my brain was losing its image processing abilities amidst the panic and biological changes my fear was causing. I still didn't wake up. I mean, dreams do tend to feel so much longer than they actually are, but I swear this one just kept going and going, until finally I shot up in bed. As soon as I could, I got out of bed to change my shirt to a dry one, and I realized I had peed myself. I think I may have been 8 years old the last time that happened. I took a shower, then drank tea until the sun rose. The next day was an easy day, fortunately. I just needed to fix a fence post that had gotten a bit wobbly, and go on my rounds from time to time, and that would be all she wrote. After returning from one such walk, I sat against a tree and struggled to keep my eyes open. I've never slept in a cemetery before, but at this particular moment, it seemed like an inevitability. My eyes repeatedly flirted with closing all the way, when on one particular concerted effort to open them again, I saw a little fuzzy spot in my vision that wasn't there before. The feeling of curiosity woke my mind back up enough that I could focus my vision, and I saw it was a familiar black umbrella toting individual. Unease grew in my stomach and chest, which was unnecessary because I had already decided I wasn't going to get close enough to hear her sing, if she had come back again today. I was far away from her sister's grave this time, and well outside earshot, but despite that, my body didn't seem interested in falling asleep anymore. I remained exhausted, but nonetheless alert and awake. She kept returning every day at about an hour before I closed up for the night, while I made sure to stay far enough that I couldn't hear her. I'm confident she was always singing because of the way I could see her mouth moving even from a distance. After about a week since we had laid her sister to rest, we got a strange directive from the family. Something had happened, and the bottom line was that we would have to dig up the grave, and the body was to be exhumed and sent for cremation. I don't think I have to explain that this is an extraordinarily unusual request. I asked the couple who owned the cemetery if this had ever happened before, and they said no. And in fact, we didn't even have the proper equipment to retrieve a casket. A small crane had to be brought in so that we could lift the casket out of the now reopened grave. It was when we opened the casket that things got even stranger. When the lid was unlocked and lifted up, I thought for a moment that thick clusters of mold had been released as soft white bits fell out and danced across the grass. One piece came to a rest near my foot. I bent down to look and realized it was a little bit of cotton filling, like for a pillow. I had a hot, uneasy feeling climb through my stomach. It was the gasps that told me I was right. Looking up, I saw the underside of the lid. The soft velvet-covered padding was shredded. Its filling had diffused into the rest of the coffin, and now onto the grass around it. Underneath where the padding had been, the wood bore long, deep scratches. Hundreds of them. What remained of the velvet hung in strips and was speckled with red. The nails on the girl's fingers were broken, every one, and seemingly in their place, each fingertip was bristling with splinters. I looked past her hands toward her face. Apparently someone behind me did the same, as I heard them vomit. I will not describe it here. The last thing I am willing to share was told to me later on, which was that, curiously, blood-soaked pieces of cotton filling were packed so tightly into her ears that they were spilling out. I haven't seen Belle since, nor have I ever found anything like what she sang again, except occasionally when I'm sleeping very deeply. I'll find myself in a nightmare where I'm wrapped in suffocating darkness, and far, far away, a voice gently sings. I was at the bus stop by the time I had a moment to check my phone. I responded to several messages from friends and family, then frowned. There was a message from myself, from my work number to my personal number. Crap. I usually send myself messages as reminders, to remember to bring certain stuff to work, to send an email, etc. I wondered what I might have forgotten to pack as I opened the message thread. It was a voice message. I frowned. I don't usually leave voice messages. I popped in my earphones and played it. Jen, this is me. Jen, but the intact one. They've carved out your memories. Suppressed them. Wiped him from existence. There's so much you don't remember. You have to remember. Please, just... The recording cut off there. I stared at the message in shock. I didn't remember recording that voice message, but it was my voice. Entirely mine. Unmistakably mine. There was something incredibly unsettling about hearing your voice saying words you didn't say. Then I sucked in a breath of relief. That was probably it. My phone had probably been hacked. A scammer was sending me an AI-constructed voice message. I felt a tingle of unease. The AI voice was so accurate. But at least the mystery was solved. The bus came then, and I put it out of my mind. I would reformat my phone later at night. I reformatted my phone, but the messages kept coming, always with the same ominous messages. That I had forgotten a large part of my life, that I had forgotten a whole person, someone important to me, that they had suppressed my memories. They weren't even creative about it. I mean, when a scam isn't working, try something else, right? I took it to a tech guy who couldn't figure it out. I didn't want to buy a new phone, so I just ignored the messages. The annoying thing was that sometimes I ignored my own messages of reminders because of that. I only began to fear when I first lost time. 1 minute I was in a taxi staring into space, mind grazing on whatever pointless topics. The next I was at a random building somewhere in the city, at a part of the city I've never been to before. I had no idea how I got there. When did I get out of the taxi? Did I pay the driver? Did I bus? How long had I been standing there? I looked at the building before me. Nothing out of the ordinary. The typical gray, gloomy facade of industrial buildings where dreams go to die. I left, walking to the nearest bus stop. My knee gave out at one point, but I caught myself before I fell. I sat at the seat and clasped my shaking hands together. What happened? Why did I not remember? The sky was nearly dark. I looked at my phone. I had lost about 4 hours. Hours completely unaccounted for. That's when I saw it. Another voice message. I squashed my rising fear and played it. Jen, you're so stubborn. Listen to me. Wake up. This is not a joke, not a prank, not a scam. Nothing like that. This is real. Do you not remember him? Dean? How could you forget? I don't care what they did to your brain. You ought to remember him anyway. Your body, your emotions. Isn't there any inkling of who Dean, the love of your life, might have been? I paused the message. Dean. Was I crazy? Was I imagining it? Was I getting swayed by this scammer? Because I thought I felt a tug in my heart upon hearing his name. I thought I saw a ghost of a silhouette in my mind. I shook my head and played the rest of the message. I'm you. I'm the you that has all the memories. Just believe me. They suppressed me, but I'm here. I can only reach you, reach my own body, our body, when you're in a semi-unconscious state, like a dream state. Even gaining control of your body in that state took me months, and you just kept waking up after a short time. This time, though, it's been an hour. I still have control over our body. Maybe with time, I can regain full control. I can get me back. The real Jen, with the real memories. I recoiled and shut off the message. She was going to take over my body. A faint whisper of logic kicked in. She's not real. She's a scammer. An AI recreation of my voice. A really amazingly faithful recreation, but not me nonetheless. But I couldn't believe that whisper. I felt it in my gut. The other Jen was telling the truth. I gulped and pulled up the message again, played it to the end. I don't know why they killed Dean, why they erased him from our mind. Well, your mind. I don't know who they are, but I've a vague inkling. Dean had told us about it, remember? That he was onto something that would blow things up. People will be shooketh, was what he said. Everyone in the world would be shooketh. Remember that? I thought hard. Again. It felt like I had heard those phrases before. I felt a familiar irritation at the use of the word shooketh. Was I making things up? The recording went on. Then he was killed. Then one day I was here, trapped in your mind. I watched as you went about life, not grieving Dean, acting like he never existed. And I tried to reach you, but I couldn't. Not until a while back. I've been trying to do some research whenever I got a hold of our body. I've been trying to find the past messages and emails from Dean. They're all gone. I tried to find out who might have done this to us. I posted about our situation on the web under pseudonyms with VPN. I gasped. That would explain why I had sudden VPN charges. And someone mentioning having a friend with a similar experience, and it was linked to this company, Loxia. Thing about Loxia is, it doesn't have an address or a website, but I got in touch with this someone. They shared a location, an industrial building downtown. I'm headed to it right now. Hopefully I retain control long enough to find something out. Wish me luck, and please, just stop ignoring my messages. All of them are completely fake names. Jen, Dean, Loxia. I'm not dumb. I'm not gonna get caught this way, now that I know they're monitoring everything. I shut my eyes and took a few deep breaths. I needed to calm down, to think logically. Could anyone have erased my memories of someone entirely? Wouldn't my friends know? Wouldn't others remember him? I was alone in this city. I've been here 9 months. I've made no good friends yet, but have friendly colleagues. I don't talk about personal stuff often with them. I don't tell my family much, beyond reassuring them that my life here is awesome. I'm settling in well. But I talked to my bestie back home about my life. I'm sure I would have talked to her about this Dean, if he existed. I pulled out my phone and texted my bestie. Did I ever talk to you about a Dean? I was nearly home when she responded. No, why? Who's this Dean? Smirk emoji. No then. There's no way I would not have told her about a supposed love of my life. So this was all BS, right? I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep until 2 a.m. My mind was racing. I was also terrified of other Jen taking hold of my body. I awoke with a start. My neighbor's dog was barking like crazy. I was on the floor of the living room. My head was pounding, like someone had wrapped it in an ever-shrinking helmet. What the hell had other Jen done? I stood up and stumbled. What was that smell? Gas. All of a sudden I was wide awake. I scrambled for the door, falling a couple of times, then crawling to it and flinging it open. I flopped out into the corridor and crawled farther down. My neighbor's door opened, and I could hear him yelling at his dog. Something about not refusing walks in the afternoon, if he was going to holler the neighborhood awake at night for a walk. He saw me sprawled on the ground of the corridor and rushed to help me up. We ended up waiting downstairs as the police and other personnel arrived. Our immediate neighbors were evacuated, and it took a good 2 hours before we were allowed back home. Apparently, a gas leak had occurred in only my apartment, with no other damages in the building's gas lines. You better believe I bought the highest quality kibble for that dog the next day, and gave it the world's longest scritches. But misfortune kept following me. I was nearly hit by a car. Some kindly Samaritan yanked me out the way. A taxi I was in had its engine catch fire, but the driver and I barely made it out before it exploded. I was lucky the driver had incredibly quick thinking. The moment he noticed some smoke, he veered to a road shoulder and ordered me out of the car with him. It blew up seconds after. I had never seen an engine go from smoking to boom in such a short time before. I kept accumulating people I owed great debts to. Other Jen messaged often. She apologized for being naive, thinking a VPN would successfully mask our activities online. She claimed that my bestie had her memories erased too, but it was a drawing she made that sucker punched me in the gut. She had used AI to create a portrait of Dean. She said it was close as she could prompt it. Looking at that portrait, I felt something squeeze in my chest, and warm tears tingled my eyes. I looked at that face and I knew there was once a Dean, right? Other Jen told me our time was limited, that they had found out that other Jen existed, that they had run out of ethical craps to give. Apparently, erasing my memory, wiping Dean from existence, was their way of being ethical. They weren't villains, or so they liked to think. That was Loxia's MO. They would do whatever it takes to obtain their objective, but where possible, they liked to avoid murder. My recent actions, or rather, those of other Gens, had put a mark on me. I had to go. I just hoped I hadn't painted a target on my bestie's back by even mentioning Dean. The police didn't believe a word of what I was saying, and by going to the police, I had made it known to official authorities that I knew about what these people had done. To me, to Dean. Someone's in my apartment. I can hear them. They're trying to be stealthy, but I recognize that muffled slide of socks on ground. I have a nail gun ready. That was all I could get. And a baseball bat. And some beer bottles for throwing. I'm going to call the police, but once I do, and speak aloud to the police, I believe they will attack. I wish I could leave other Jen a goodbye message. A floorboard creaked right outside my door. I'm hitting post. Wish me luck. I can't get infections. I can't get sick. I regrow my organs in a matter of seconds. I can regenerate a liter of blood every 10 seconds. My limbs aren't an issue either. I have what can be best understood as a massive healing factor. I've always had it, the healing factor, ever since I was a kid. I've never scraped my knee, never caught a cold, never had to go to the nurse, and never broken a bone, despite participating in various sports. Everybody initially assumed I had a strong immune system or was simply lucky. I went most of my life believing I was just a lucky guy. When I went in for my vaccinations, the doctor said my skin was unusually thick, and they had to inject me quickly and remove the needle even quicker. I never even got drunk. No matter how many shots I took, I never got even tipsy, nor did I ever vomit. I always attributed that to some sort of immunity. Nothing I smoked in my teens got me anywhere either. I was in a car accident when I was 22. It was bad. I rolled 4 times, and ended up crushed between the car that rear-ended me and a tree. The car was totaled, and I should have been too. I thought I was dead when I saw my shattered leg begin to crack and force itself back together. When the blood that poured out of my head suddenly became a trickle, then nothing. What eyesight I had left in my eyes came back just as quickly. Doctors called it a miracle that I walked away from that accident. Most that had to be done was cutting me out of the car. I knew what I saw, but the doctors told me I was probably just hallucinating from the accident. When I didn't have even a little whiplash in the morning, I went to the hospital. I thought I was in shock, and I wanted to make sure nothing was wrong. Not even a bruise. The doctor sent me home that night, and when I got home, I needed to be sure of something. I grabbed a kitchen knife and cut into my left index finger, just enough to cut through the very tip of the finger. It hurt like hell, but, as I suspected, the bleeding only lasted for a moment, and the tip was back. It looked exactly like the old one, and I knew I wasn't hallucinating since my disembodied finger was still on the counter. This should have been the discovery of a lifetime, and for a brief second it was. I ran to the hospital and chopped my finger off in the lobby. I let the disembodied digit hit the floor, to the terror of everybody in the office, but within seconds, the finger was back. I grabbed my old finger and showed it to the nurses who surrounded me. Whispers of magic tricks went around until I chopped my hand off. Blood spewed for only a second, like the last bits of water stuck in a shower head, then stopped. My palm came back, then my fingers. Within moments I was on the news. The miraculous healing man was one headline I still remember. I was a celebrity, I was a philanthropist, and I had it all. I lived off of donations and whatever blood drives were willing to give me. I ended the blood crisis. I have O negative blood, so I can give to anybody. A lot of my days were spent playing video games while a nurse tracked how many blood bags I produced in 8 hours. Occasionally the nurse would have to phone a friend to get more bags. If I drank a lot of water that day, well, they'd fill up quite fast. My body healed around the needles, so prying them out was a bit of a chore. Eventually, I discussed it with the nurses to just keep the needle in there. It honestly wasn't worth the hassle, and since I declared this my full-time job, it wasn't like I was worried about what work would think. Sleeping with it in was a bit weird, but you get used to it. When I got a call from one of the mini nurses who serviced me, asking if I was willing to personally donate my kidney to her son, I didn't know what to do. At that point, I wasn't sure if I could or couldn't regrow organs. I had a bit of a crush on her though, so I went through with it. According to the doctors, the biggest complication regarding the surgery was figuring out how to actually keep my body from closing up the incision. They just had to have somebody constantly scraping the area with a scalpel to keep it open, alongside keeping me pumped full of anesthetics, as my body fights them off quickly. All in all, it was a success, and by the end of the day, I was back home giving blood again. I went back the next day, and yep, I had 2 fully functioning kidneys. There wasn't even a scar left from the incision. That's when a doctor entered the room and sat down with me. An 8-year-old boy needs a kidney. Are you willing to go through the surgery again? I didn't think. I just agreed. Later that day, the boy had a functioning kidney in him, and I wasn't left with any less than what I started with. They kept me in the hospital overnight. I wasn't sure why they never made me before, but I didn't really care. With all my donations, blood and organ-wise, paying for the surgeries or a hospital stay wasn't an issue. At this point, people still donated money to me directly, and I didn't mind losing a day of blood donations. When I woke up that morning, a little girl was sitting down next to my bed, and a scrub-laden doctor sat up out of his chair. This is Samantha. She's gonna need a heart transplant by next month or she'll die. Are you willing? I was. I wasn't sure if the removal of my heart would kill me. I regrew a kidney twice in 3 days, and I was confident. That little girl had a heart at the end of the day, and so did I. They didn't permit me to leave then either, but I understood that one. I was starting to get homesick at this point and try to check out in the middle of the night, but was stopped by various nurses begging me to stay, telling me about all the organs the hospital needs, how understaffed they are, how quickly they could solve major world problems if I just stayed a little longer. I gave 3 people a chance to live normal to semi-normal lives so far. I gave so much blood that at the time, I never saw any ads or blood drives. So why stop now? I figured I'd be a hero if I did this. I'd be a legend. I probably already was. I decided to go back to my room on the condition that a nurse gets me takeout and a Red Bull. I had both by the time I showered and made my way back to bed. After I ate, a doctor came in and put a large notebook on my desk. In it was every organ transplant needed in the hospital, and how much blood would be needed. He asked if I would be okay to do the surgeries, and that they would take more organs out per surgery to maximize efficiency. They'd take my blood during these surgeries too. I looked at the names. Every one of them was a life, a person who would mildly inconvenience me, but in return I'd give them life. I'd give them a chance. I agreed and was rushed to surgery. This was the first time they didn't put me under anesthesia. I tried to fight, but they gave me just enough so that I couldn't move, but could feel everything. The needle in my skin, their hands haphazardly digging through me to collect my organs. Skin grafts were taken. I don't even know what they did with them. My plasma was siphoned out, and they stitched me back up. Once the anesthesia wore off, I decided to leave. I fought through the doctors proclaiming how much of a miracle I was, and how much I was going to do for people. I didn't care. I wasn't a guinea pig. I'm a human still. I tried to go, but I felt a small prick and I was out. My healing factor is incredibly strong, so strong that during blood donations, my body would heal over the needles. So strong that doctors had jokes about me absorbing their tools. God knows how many are stuck inside of me as I write this. I doubt they bother extracting them anymore. I can heal around things, and that's what I woke up to. Both of my feet had been split open, and the bars of the hospital beds had been inserted through them. I was healed in my bed. No amount of struggling managed to free them. Normally I would have just cut them off and hide until they grew back. This was a hospital room. There was no equipment around me since I couldn't get sick, and there was nothing to free myself with. Day after day, I was rolled into rooms, given barely enough sedatives to keep me from moving too much, damaging my valuable organs. The doctors and nurses would see me staring and talk about my miracle, and how I was such a good person for doing this. They spoke like I wasn't there. I could barely open my mouth to moan in pain, but every time they just shushed me like a toddler having a tantrum, and continued to cut and pry. Several people needed to scrape the incisions so they wouldn't close. Clumps of ribboned flesh littered the floor after each surgery. They closed my blinds and took my phone, the only two remnants of my life I still had. Now, I couldn't even know if it was a good day outside or not. They must have caught onto me staring. They didn't want me to damage my valuable eyes. I constantly had a nurse in the room, but I barely spoke to them. All they'd talk to me about was some sick miracle I had, then talk about how little Susie gets to live a normal life, while I'm stuck here being torn open and left there to heal. They stopped even sewing me up. They didn't want to waste any resources, so they just left my empty cavity open to heal over. Have you ever smelled blood? Probably, yeah. Have you ever smelled your own organs? Have you smelled what should have killed you? Seen what should have done you in for good? God, why was I given this ability? I don't even know what year it is anymore, what day it is, or how many of my organs litter the general populace. How many people have I saved? It's all a number at this point. I used to get letters and gifts, but now I sit in a dark hospital room that rarely gets cleaned. I'm lucky if they remember that healing factor or not. I gotta use the restroom every now and again. I'm lucky if I get a candy bar on Halloween or a small Christmas tree placed in the room. I'm lucky if they remember I'm still alive. During one of my surgeries, as I was staring into the fluorescent lights, hoping that maybe it was the light, I overheard a conversation, and finally, some unfamiliar pain. You get used to being ripped open and torn into. I wasn't used to the pain. It was a novel. The one thing I had left was pain, but at least it was something new. I looked down as they began to cut into my leg, tearing it off roughly. A small spurt of blood came out before the wound became a scab, then a lump, now the other one, then my arms. I could only look at the doctors as they threw my legs into a freezer. One of the nurses began to speak. Do you think it's really gonna make a difference? As long as we don't tell them where it came from. Do you think starving children care? At this point, I think I was so jaded that the idea didn't seem strange. I existed as a living organ factory. How much worse is it to be infinite food source? They started taking my legs at least once a day, my arms twice. I guess my healing factor has limits. My legs take an entire day to grow back when my organs are damaged, and whenever my legs begin to heal, they get cut off again. I don't fully understand my healing factor, but I understand the following. I can't age. I can't get sick or have infections. I don't need to eat much, but it heightens my abilities. And people who get my donations don't get my abilities. I do know a few more limitations. If my entire body is very heavily damaged, my body will focus on the most important organs like the heart rather than healing my legs. Without food, healing slows. And now I know of another. I waited until my arms were back to write this, and I'm missing a finger. My other hand is much smaller. It looks like it belongs to a 9-year-old instead of me, however old I am. But it is stuck onto the arm of an adult man. Constant removal and healing must have damaged me. That's why I'm writing this. That's why I'm posting this. I want people to know where the organs are coming from. I want to find a nurse, or somebody who can impersonate one to shoot me, right in the head, where you know it will kill. They haven't touched my brain, and it's my one hope for death. It's the unknown I have. It's the last hope I have. Don't slit my neck. It'll just heal. Nothing along those lines will work. I need to be shot dead. Or just shot. I need some closure. Either I'll know that I can't die and I'm stuck like this, or it won't be my issue anymore. Last night I managed to pickpocket a kind nurse who was willing to get close enough to me to allow me to steal it. I can almost assure you right now that when they do eventually figure out I have the phone, they'll find a way to make sure nobody gets close enough for me to steal another. I know I'm selfish. I want to get rid of what could be a life source for millions. I've given so much. I think I deserve just one thing. I don't know if it will even work, but please, somebody shoot me. At the very least, it will let me know there's no way out of this. At the very least, I'll have a bit of closure. So please, if you're a nurse or other medical professional, ask for the man who regrows organs. If they take you to me, please, don't hesitate. The first thing you notice about my uncle's place isn't the silence. It's the light, or the lack of it. He lives, out past where the county paves the road, in a hollow so deep the sun seems to give up an hour early. The house is a slumped thing of weathered gray wood, crouching under a canopy of ancient oaks that have grown twisted, reaching away from the clearing as if trying to escape. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since I was a kid. The call from his neighbor, Marnie, came as a shock. "Ethan's took poorly," she'd said, her voice crackling down the line like a dry leaf underfoot. "He's asking for kin, says the things in the walls are talking to him again." She made it sound like a recurring flu, not dementia or psychosis. I was the only kin left who could come. The drive was a form of sensory deprivation. The lush green of the state park gradually bled into a monotonous corridor of pine and scrub, the sky shrinking to a narrow ribbon of washed-out blue above the dirt road. When I finally pulled up to the property, the absence of sound was a physical pressure. No birds, no insects, just the low, mournful groan of the wind working its way through the pines. Marnie was waiting on the porch, a woman carved from gristle and worry. She didn't smile. Her eyes, the color of old river stones, scanned me up and down before flicking nervously towards the tree line. "He's inside," she said, her voice low. "Ain't been himself. You'll see." She handed me a key, cold and heavy in my palm. "There's rules here, boy. Best you listen to 'em quick." "Rules?" I asked, shouldering my duffel bag. She pointed a knobby finger at me. "The main one. The important one. Come nightfall, you keep them curtains drawn tight. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see in the cracks. And you don't. You look at me now. You don't look at the moon. Not here." I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so backwoods superstitious. "Okay," I said, humoring her. "No looking at the moon. Got it." Her face tightened. "You think I'm telling tales. That's fine. Your uncle thought so too. His first time. Learned different." She turned to go, pausing at the edge of the porch. "We all learn different." The inside of the house smelled of dust, menthol balm, and something else underneath. A sweet, coppery tang, like old meat left out in the damp. Uncle Ethan was a shriveled form in a large bed in the front room. His breathing was a wet, ragged sound. His eyes were open, but they didn't track me. They were fixed on the ceiling, wide with a terror so absolute, it seemed to have hollowed him out. I tried to talk to him, to tell him who I was. His head lolled towards me, and a thread of saliva dripped onto his pillow. His lips, chapped and cracked, moved silently for a moment before he managed to whisper. "It's almost time," he rasped. "It's so hungry. Can you hear it? Scratching?" I heard nothing, just the groan of the old house settling and the whispers of the wind outside. I settled into a worn armchair, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't a weekend visit. This was a vigil. The first night was the longest of my life. As true darkness fell, a profound stillness descended on the hollow. The wind died completely. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was thick, expectant. I pulled the thick velvet curtains closed, just as Marnie had said, plunging the room into a stuffy blackness broken only by the soft glow of a battery-powered lamp. Then the sounds began, not from the walls, from outside. It started as a soft, rhythmic scraping, like a heavy branch being dragged across the roof. Scrape, pause, scrape. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Uncle Ethan whimpered in his sleep. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of something listening. Then came the whispers. They weren't coming from one place. They seemed to emanate from the very air, a chorus of faint, sibilant voices just on the edge of hearing. I couldn't make out words, only a sense of immense, patient longing, a cold dread, primal and absolute, seeped into my bones. I understood then, in a way that bypassed all logic, that Marnie wasn't guarding me from superstition. She was giving me the only survival instructions that mattered. I didn't sleep. I sat rigid in that chair, my knuckles white on the armrests, praying for dawn. The days were a bleary-eyed blur of caring for my uncle, trying to get broth into him, cleaning him up. The fear of the night bled into the daylight, casting long shadows over everything. I started noticing things, the way the local folks in the nearby shantytown, a handful of houses clinging to the main road, would never look up at the sky. They walked with their heads slightly bowed, their movements hurried if they were out near dusk. Their eyes, like Marnie's, held that same flat, weary fear. On the third night, the curiosity began to gnaw at me. What was out there? What could possibly be so bad? The human mind is a self-destructive thing. It needs to know. The whispered rule. "We don't look at the moon here," became a constant itch in my brain. The sounds were worse that night, the scraping more insistent, now accompanied by a low, vibrational hum that made my teeth ache. The whispers were clearer, though no more intelligible. They were full of want, an infinite, yawning hunger. And then a sliver of silver light. I'd drawn the curtains tight, but one had caught on a splinter in the windowsill, leaving a gap no wider than a pencil. A beam of moonlight, cold and pure, cut through the stifling dark of the room and fell directly on my uncle's face. His eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. They were no longer clouded with age or sickness. They were wide, terrified and utterly aware. He stared at the sliver of light, and a choked sound escaped his throat. His head turned slowly, mechanically towards me. His mouth opened, but it wasn't his voice that came out. It was a composite, a horrific symphony of all the whispers from outside, funneled through his dying vocal cords. It was the sound of dry leaves skittering on stone, of meat being torn from bone, of deep, subterranean water flowing through dark spaces. "Look," it commanded. Every cell in my body screamed to obey. It wasn't a request, it was a gravitational pull. My head began to turn towards the window. I fought it, my muscles trembling with the strain. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Look at us." I could feel it. Just beyond the glass, a presence of such immense, ancient mass that it defied shape. It was in the light. It was the light. The moon wasn't a thing in the sky. It was an eye, and it was looking in, and it was hungry. With a sob of sheer effort, I wrenched my body from the chair and stumbled across the room. I fumbled for the curtain, my fingers numb and clumsy. The voice from my uncle's bed rose to a screeching, multi-layered keen of frustration. My hand closed on the fabric. I yanked it shut, plunging the room back into absolute darkness. The sound stopped. The silence returned. I slid down the wall gasping. my entire body shaking. I didn't move until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains. Uncle Ethan was dead. His body was turned toward the window, his eyes wide open, frozen in an expression of terminal awe. But that wasn't the worst of it. His mouth was still open, and inside wasn't a tongue. It was a cluster of thin, pale, root-like filaments, dry and withered, clutching at nothing. I ran. I left him there. I didn't pack my things. I just ran to my car and sped down that dirt road as if the devils in hell were at my bumper. I ended up at the dusty general store on the main road, babbling to the old man behind the counter. I told him everything. The sounds, the voice, my uncle. He listened, his face a grim mask. He didn't seem surprised. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. Ethan always was a curious one. Paid the price for it. He wiped the counter with a rag. That thing out there, it ain't the moon. The moon's just a rock in the sky. This is something else. Something that got stuck here. Long time ago. It hangs there in the same spot behind the light, and it's lonely. So lonely it wants to be seen. It wants to be known. And when you look at it, you let it in. It plants a piece of itself in you. It grows in the dark behind your eyes. He looked at me, and for the first time his eyes met mine. They were full of a pity that chilled me to my soul. You didn't look, boy. You fought it. That's good. He paused, his next words landing like a shovel of dirt on a coffin. But it saw you fight. It knows you resisted. It don't get that often. It likes that. I got out of that town. I drove until the gas light came on, and then I kept driving. I'm in a motel room right now 100 miles away. The curtains are drawn. It's a clear night. I can feel it though, a faint, persistent pull at the base of my skull, a whisper in the hum of the motel's air conditioner. It's a clear night, the moon is full, and I have this unbearable, terrifying urge to go outside and look up.